I want to make a disclaimer, first of all, before I start doing anything. Um, this is a talk that I kind of prepared, and the relevance to games only comes when I get the first sort of element of the talk out of the way. It's almost like games become relevant when you unpick my argument here, which is that, and the basic argument is that Mark Zuckerberg is a scumbag. Okay, and that is the main point of this talk, really. Zuckerberg, I nearly said something really bad then, which would have been bad for YouTube. Mark Zuckerberg is an imbecile that doesn't understand what he's doing. And the reason why I hold this position is because of the way he's proposing that his virtual reality universe, the metaverse, his one version of what the metaverse could be, because there are multiple different versions of what this could be, is going to be a fundamentally alienating space. And interestingly, it's particular games that tell us that it is going to be an alienating space and also illustrate how it could be different from that. So I'm going to draw heavily on this in this talk from not so much post-phenomenology as Daniel was doing, although that does play a role later on when I talk about the kind of solution to what needs to be done, but rather earlier phenomenological positions on the continuum between space and place and how aspects of the metaverse and how it's being proposed will prevent us from moving from an understanding of things as undifferentiated space into lived in existential place. And because of that, fundamentally, we won't be able to dwell in a metaverse if we can't make that transition from feeling in alienated space into lived in places. So I've pretty much done the talk already. I'm not going to stop there. If you want to know more about this, and here come, I mean, I feel dirty. I feel fundamentally soiled at this point for doing this, but most of this will be in this book, which comes out on October the 12th. You know, get your university library to buy it. You know, wait for it to come out on Zed Library if you must, but it's most of the stuff is in there. So, what the hell am I talking about? The metaverse. I'm sure this is an audience will know already what I'm talking about, but maybe you don't appreciate the cynicism, but through which I approach this. Metaverse, another one of these annoying, horrendous terms which come along every few years, which become buzzy, 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 and is probably going to disappear without trace in a few years' time, or at least I hope so. And I would compare it here to blockchain. When I was working on a ERC project back in 2014 on smart cities, everyone wanted to talk about the blockchain. Everyone wanted to say how the blockchain was going to revolutionize democracy and it was going to make society more transparent. And then 2 years later, we got Trump, and then we got Brexit, and then we got Boris Johnson, etc., etc. And did blockchain do anything? No, it didn't. And the metaverse hopefully will fall over in the same kind of way. So many companies say they're building towards a metaverse. What does it actually refer to? Persistent, real-time rendered through three-dimensional world in virtual reality that's experienced synchronously by an unlimited number of users in that space. Already, if you take out the virtual reality part and you think persistent, real-time world that is experienced synchronously by an unlimited number of users, then all of a sudden we're already talking about things we're familiar with, like Roblox, for example, like any number of online games at like Fortnite. There are a number of different comparisons for this. It's the virtual reality part which really differentiates it from things that we already have. Anything with regards to the metaverse and indeed virtual reality itself is contingent on the idea of presence. The unique selling point of virtual reality, going back into the 1980s when Lanier was putting together the first virtual reality commercial sets in the 1980s for the VPL lab, was all about presence, how virtual reality would give us presence within these systems in a way that other media cannot. I'm skeptical about, one, what presence means in this terms, and two, whether other media actually don't have presence. When I'm playing a game, depending on what it is, I mean, this summer I played Stray, I felt pretty present in that world. I felt pretty connected to that world because of the way the game was designed, because of the architecture of the game, because of the narrative, because of the agency that I was afforded. I felt all sorts of presence in that game, and I thought it was, a really well developed and well realized game itself. But to not diverge too much, the unique selling point of virtual reality has always been presence, and the technological imaginaries of the metaverse are underpinned by a sense of presence. It is a space that supports continuity of identity, continuity of objects, continuity of a history, payments, and achievements over time as well. And the payments part is quite important here, because if the metaverse, along the lines that companies are proposing at the moment, is to be realized, this is not just a space for us to play in, it is a space for us to exist in. We will do much more than just muck around in the metaverse. We will exist, we will shop, we will trade with other users, we will exchange goods and services. So it's an environment for socializing, working, playing, very importantly, exercising, dating, all other interactions that we can think of. The metaverse is supposed to be a facsimile of what we do in everyday life. So in other words, the metaverse will be a continuous space for us to dwell inside. A world of place attachment, perhaps more attractive than the supposed real world in which we exist. And while the metaverse is shared, all our experiences of it are going to be subjective. And there becomes an important hinging point. Every user will have an individual sense of presence of this. And therefore, we will have a continuum of feeling more to less present, depending on our circumstances, our experiences, our intuitions around things, our knowledge, our socialization, etc., etc., what makes us as individuals. Designing something from scratch to fit everyone, if you like, building for the lowest common denominator, is not a particularly good idea. For those of you from the UK, I call this the ITV problem, where ITV builds television programs for the lowest common denominator, and they are almost universally terrible because of that. The metaverse is going to be, I don't want to call it the ITV metaverse, but the metaverse is going to have a similar problem. How do you build something from scratch that is for everyone, but allows significant differentiation for everyone as well? Because we are all different to one another. Now, if Zuckerberg wants me to live in this metaverse, then he will have to let me live in a manner where being can be understood as being. This is where the philosophy part comes in, right? So what I mean here is it will have to be a space where I can understand myself and others in a way that is attractive, that is unfolds a series of possibilities for me to advance and develop as a human being, that does not keep me in stasis as a hopeless unit of economic value to be exploited by advertisers, which is, let's be fair, the Facebook model of how you make money. The challenge is to create a world that I want to be in and spend a considerable amount of time in, that I want to dwell in. Much like designers of video games are successful in creating worlds in which I do want to exist in and do want to spend a considerable amount of time in, and to a certain extent do dwell in over time. Now, this paper argues that proper dwelling in the world is critical to our understanding of being and other beings, and that dwelling itself is a relationship to other things, and that if this is to work, that relationship to other things, be they other people and other objects within the world, has to be of a certain quality that allows us to manipulate them, to bring them into our own sense of being in that place, to have individualism around them, to establish that these are our things. They belong to me. They are part of my identity in this space. And if that can't be done, then you're going to have a fundamentally alienating space to which you're going to be forced to exist in if you take up membership of this world. In this sense, dwelling is a really, really important term here. Dwelling, and what I want to use dwelling for here, is a function of the understanding of being. An understanding of being is a function of dwelling. When we are comfortable, when we live in a particular way, when we are satisfied with our environment around us, when the undifferentiated space transforms into a meaningful place, we have a different relationship to ourselves and others, which allows a deeper understanding of ourselves and others as well. Space, and when we are in space itself, is not dwelling. When we move along the continuum from space to place, we are moving towards a sense of dwelling and feeling at home in the world. Dwelling needs to be understood in reference not only to things, but also taking those things up into care. We don't just surround ourselves with things, but things have meaning to us. Sure, you know, I might live in a world, and we all do, of mass-produced junk, right? But it's my junk. You might have exactly the same thing, but that's not yours. That's, you know, that's mine. That's not yours. I have done things to this. I have scratched my name on it with something. You know, I have made things my own. I have spatially positioned them in a particular arrangement which is meaningful to me. I have done things with my things which gives them meaning for me over time, and which I then form a connection with them. So by taking things into care like that, we stand in relation to that thing, and that's part of our attunement as dwelling. When we stand in relation to things in particular ways, we stand in relation to them, which means they are meaningful, and therefore they form part of our sort of existential locale in which we feel comfortable and we feel at home. Now, in the context of digital worlds or digital playgrounds, online games, it's the manner of orienting and locating yourself in a digital world that is understood as place that will be part of the attunement or dwelling in place. And as such, there will be practices of use that are conducive towards dwelling. What I want to argue here is that when we feel very comfortable in a game world, we are used to particular ways and methods of doing things in that space. We are used to using objects in particular ways. We become accustomed to the use of these things. We have our favorites. It's kind of weird to reflect on this sometimes. I was playing a game called Road Rash 2 for the Mega Drive last week because I'm a bit like that, and I still think it's 1992. And I kept on using the same bike over and over and over. And as I progressed through the levels, of course, I start getting worse and worse and worse because the bike is a piece of junk. But the bike starts to feel like mine. I felt a genuine sort of, I don't want to buy a new one. I just want to tear about on this one because it feels like it's mine. It's not mine. It's a random, you know, it's not random. It's a planned set of pixels on a screen, but I felt ownership of this. Why did I feel ownership? Well, I won a few races with it, and you know, I kicked some people. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Road Rash, but you know, you get chains and clubs, and you hit the other drivers, and it's a lot of fun. And you know, I really felt, yeah, you know, I really felt in, you know, this is my bike, and some of the other, you know, non-playable characters in the game, the other bike riders, you know, I really hate that guy. There's one called Viper, and I really, really hate that guy. There's no guy. Viper isn't a person. Viper's not a thing. But in the world in which I was in, I enveloped, you know, got into this sort of digital envelope of these things started to have meaning to me. And this is really what I'm talking about here. We have practices, we have ways of doing things which are conducive towards our dwelling in that environment. And this is how, if you like, digital dwelling occurs. Again, my contention here is that the metaverse isn't going to allow this to happen. So in terms of care, when we're trying to understand the world that we're in, we understand it through taking objects into care and being involved with the world through our engagement with different types of equipment. Again, I think this is probably going to resonate with a lot of people here. If you think simply about how you interface with games, you know, I have two controllers for my PlayStation 5. I don't know why, but I prefer one over the other. They are identical to one another, but there is a feeling when it's in my hands. I know the difference of them. Again, I will reiterate, they are identical to one another. They are just as bog standard stony ones. They are not particularly different in any way, shape, or form. I haven't marked one differently, anything like that. It is a certain sort of knowledge through the hands that I feel more comfortable with this one. The way that we come to terms with our world and have familiarity with it is through how we manipulate objects in this way. And indeed, that doesn't just go for my physical interactions with the game system as an assemblage, but it also goes for what my avatar or character does within a game itself as well. I interact with particular equipment in that game, particular things, particular objects, particular other characters, and through that, I begin to garner an understanding of that world itself, and it deepens my understanding of the environment, therefore moving from that sort of undifferentiated place into undifferentiated space, apologies, into that relationship with place. So this is critical to understanding how we make a sense of place. And the kind of understanding of space is an existential nearness or distance compared to place. It's dependent upon bringing things into care. So in essence, the metaverse is going to need to be a place where the possibility of bringing things into care is possible and will be done just like successful gaming worlds actually do. I'm not going to dwell too much on this. I'm happy to share these slides with you. And if anyone wants to discuss this stuff with me, they're more than welcome to do so. But this is where it goes hardcore Martin Heidegger. And yeah, let's, yeah, he's a whole thing. Really, what I want to emphasize here is that care does not just relate to our relationship with other human beings, it also relates to non-human actors as well and non-human objects as well. And that's why in digital worlds, care still exists. There is a potential line of argument for people who really, really buy this stuff that, digital worlds are created, they're not organic in the sense that the real world could be understood, albeit I think that's a fallacious argument anyway. So therefore, this care relationship doesn't exist in digital worlds because all you're reacting to is pre-planned and pre-made and systematic, if you like, procedural, to borrow from Ian Bogost, procedural aspects of things which aren't actually real. But it doesn't really matter as far as I'm concerned. We can still have care for other things which aren't, are just not real in that physical, tangible sense. They are real to us because the world itself is meaningful to us. And when the world itself is meaningful, we've got to that point because we have stood in a particular relationship with the other things in that environment. So we're always comporting ourselves towards whatever we understand the world to be. A world is a referential whole, and we understand entities through this referential whole. When we might go into the metaverse, we will be enveloped in this pre-planned world, and we will understand it as a referential whole. The other things in that environment, we won't take them out of the context of it if it works as a world itself. This is what happens when we feel a sort of deep sense of presence and immersion in a video game. We consider those things in the context of the game itself. We do not disengage them from the contextual way in which we understand them. To borrow from Daniel briefly, if we were to take a post-phenomenological view of this, this would be called, as Don Hyde calls it, the not the embodied view, where am I going? Hermeneutic relation that we have with technology, where we understand the world itself through our engagement with the technology itself. This is a very, very deep understanding of place. When we understand something as a meaningful world, it is not a Cartesian set of coordinates in any way, shape, or form. It is a meaningful existential locale for us to exist in, somewhere where we reside, we dwell, where we feel that our life is actually meaningful when we spend time within it. And familiarity with such places is not from nearness or distance, but existential. So we're not located in space-time at that point when we're in a world of this type. We're always somewhere more or less familiar. So from this perspective, things actually look promising for Zuckerberg. We could be familiar in a computer-generated world, given the time spent there, but also what we do there. I use the example here of a shop at the top of a hill might be geometrically closer than the supermarket shop in town, but because of the difficulty in getting there, my frequenting the supermarket over time, it is not exponentially closer to me. It is not experientially closer to me, I should say. So what is that example? What am I trying to say here? Distance is not important. Familiarity is the important thing when we're talking about world and dwelling in this sense. Metaverse can be closer than the house next door if I spend a lot of time there. I mean, and that might sound like a joke at the bottom, but I try to spend as little time in work as possible and as much time in GTA 5 online as possible. So actually, yeah, if you asked me, where a particular building is on campus, I probably couldn't tell you, but I could tell you a hell of a lot what goes on in GTA 5 online because I spend more time there. It's a more meaningful place for me. And, for those of us who are employed in higher education, you will understand this. The university itself is a fundamentally alienating concept and an alienating spatial entity. And I far prefer to be shooting the place up. What I mean by that is not the university, but in GTA 5, just to make that clear. The really key thing I want to talk about here from a philosophical perspective is the idea of deseverance and directionality. This is taken verbatim from part 1 of Martin Heidegger's Being and Time, section 23. And Heidegger defines deseverance as the building blocks of spatiality. Dissevering amounts to making the farness vanish. That is, making the remoteness of something disappear, bringing it close. Dasein, his word for not quite human being, but being there when we are in the world, is essentially deseverant. So what is Heidegger saying here? We as entities have a drive towards deseverance. It is the way we are in the world itself. It can't be avoided, and our understanding of the world comes from this desevering motivation. We are always trying to bring things closer to us, into a relationship with us, in order to understand the world itself. But for that to happen, there has to be distance in the first instance. If something is close to begin with, we never develop the relationship where it begins from distance and comes inwards to us in order to be understood as close. If something is built in a particular way where everything is flat, neutral, easy to use, we never develop the relationship with things themselves that make them meaningful in the first place. As Heidegger says, the original passing of the world condition of world strangeness or world openness is essentially deseverant. We find things at first a bit weird, uncanny, difficult to understand. And as we spend more time and we orient ourselves in particular ways, these strange aspects to things get worn away. We find we are comfortable with things. We start to dwell in an environment where we move from the strange to the comfortable and the known. So a preliminary strangeness is what is needed in the metaverse. Haha. That's exactly what we're not going to get in the metaverse. But it again is what successful games actually do. When we find ourselves landed in a game environment, at first we stumble. Our hands are not used to the things that we need to do in order to move through that environment. We have a learning curve. We are put through a few easy missions, first of all, in order to get to grips with the controls. We are put through a few easy experiences at the beginning in order for us to get used to what this world is like. The metaverse isn't going to give us the easy from the beginning. It's going to give us the easy all the way through, because the whole point of the metaverse is to be a platform to execute the economic principles of Meta/Facebook as a company. It needs to be easy. It needs to be an easy and simple platform in order for advertising revenue to be generated at a mass scale. Advertisers don't want complex. They want it to be straight in front. So the metaverse goes against what we know, not just from classical phenomenology, but also from the way that successful games are designed. That the way we actually achieve dwelling in an environment is to move from the strange to the familiar. We're going to start with the familiar, and that's going to be really problematic. That is going to affect how we are in that environment, our mood, the manner in which we disclose ourselves to other entities and understand entities is the mood that we're in. And how we actually approach these things is therefore really, really important. And if I am put into a place where everything is just fundamentally the same, fairly boring, fairly weak, not very interesting. It's all there to do this, that, and the other, not really serve my needs in any particular form. I'm not going to be in a very good mood, neither as a person, but also in terms of how I am phenomenologically in that place, how I am comported towards it. The game that starts in a fundamentally difficult way, but then allows me to develop expertise very quickly in order to feel at home in it, it hooks me in a particular way. I feel accomplishment. I feel like I'm achieving something. I feel like I'm moving forwards in that space. And a world which is fundamentally there just for us to plow into straight away and feel at home at to begin with isn't going to be feeling at home at all in this sense. So, to be in the world in a way that allows us to do well, we must stand in relation to other things, care for other things, and have a particular comportment towards other things in that world. And that relationality requires us to overcome deseverance through activity. Essentially, what we must be able to do is build. And I've used a shot from Sims here as a very crude and really on the nose example of what I mean by build here. We have agency and interactivity to produce this kind of belonging in the world. We can build our own thing. We can take ownership of things. We can bring things into care in order to make them feel like our own. Everything in this, what we see in that Sims world to the right there, everyone sees the same thing, but it's mine because I placed it and I did it and I put it there and I chose those bed sheets, etc., etc. I put my stamp of authenticity upon this thing. What is going to be problematic for the metaverse, a platform which is really purely designed in order to measure particular modes of engagement and attention in order to make us more efficient economic units for advertisers, is it going to let us do these things? And the answer to that is I very much doubt it, because it's not really what they're aiming to do at all. How does one build in the metaverse? Will we be allowed to do this? If it's pre-built for maximum engagement, then world strangeness is not going to be there. Structures are essentially designed for dwelling, but not all buildings are designed for dwelling. And what we could see is a massive space which will be put together in order for us to do certain things in it, but not allow us to have any notes of classic individuality or being able to do our own thing within it. And just exactly, again, where certain games succeed by using these mechanisms of being able to build in order to engage in particular ways, to orient us and attune us in a particular mood towards that space, and where we feel present, we're not even get the first building blocks for that. So in the metaverse, what I question is it even possible? What will I do? How will I do it? With whom will I build, create, and do things? How will things themselves do their thing? How will we be able to react to things which are digitally created? And is the whole sense of immersion in a world like this going to be completely inauthentic? And if so, shouldn't we stop this right now and say, well, actually, just as I've done in the book that comes out in October, there's really successful examples of how this has been done. This is not the way to do it. And if you want to see how it's been done, go and see what all those kids are doing in Roblox, and go and see what people are doing in any number of online worlds, gaming worlds, which actually show the principles of how we relate to space digitally, what keeps us involved, what makes us dwell, what we actually want from a space like this.